Good evening, and welcome back to Vegas October 1 Sounds. Tonight I'm going to go over a little concept that is very important that I see is being used and abused, and that is the alignment of supersonic crack with muzzles. Don't do it. Theoretically, it doesn't provide too much information, and practically it never occurs. Some people have been saying that they can take these, well, let's just take a real example. This is just some random video that I pulled up. It happens to be something that came up first in my search. And in this video, we can see we have some supersonic cracks, 13 of them. And let's get up my marking tool here so I can do some marking. And then down here we see that we have some muzzle blasts. And what another channel did was try to take the supersonic cracks, cut them out, and then overlay them onto the muzzle blasts, and claim that because they weren't aligning, there was something going on of interest. Well, that's just hogwash, because supersonic cracks almost never line up with the muzzle blast. In fact, theoretically, it should never happen unless you have the shooting location in a fixed position, the recording position in a fixed location, the speed of sound in a fixed is constant, the speed of the bullet is the same, and then on top of that is the crucial one, which is the path or trajectory of the bullet is identical from shot to shot. Those are the only conditions under which the supersonic crack and the muzzle blast theoretically should be identical, because in that case the lags will be identical, and if you line up one bullet, the rest will line up because they all have the same lag. But if the bullet path changes, they have different lags, and therefore from bullet to bullet they're not going to line up. Oh yeah, sure, you can, sometimes they can get close, particularly when the lag is small. Let's say you have a video location like a Oasis Apartments where the lag is on the order of 20 to 60 milliseconds. In those cases, if you weren't careful, you might actually claim that the supersonic crack lined up with the muzzle blast, but you really would just be fooling yourself, because if you look closer, they don't. So what I did here was I pulled up this video, and then I added an instance layer right here, these little white lines going across the log frequency plot that marked all of these supersonic cracks, and I did them, pretty accurately. You can see that I tried to mark them right at the onset of the supersonic crack, say for right there and there and there, and there's 13 of them. Okay, and then what I'll do is simulate what the other channel was trying to do, which was you take these shots up there, you cut them out with a photo editor, and then you try to overlay them here. Well, I do that with another pane, so I can continually do this, and this pane contains the instance that were measured up there. So let's see, the supersonic cracks were 13. You can see them very clearly, and the muzzle blasts are 13. 1, 2, 3, 4, a little bit of a weak one, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe a bullet strike there before that, 9, real weak there. Pardon me. I think it was at 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, yeah, and then some noise and echoing. So let's go ahead and take our sonic points and line them. I got to stop for a moment and get a cough drop, so be right back. Okay, some of the cold I had earlier days, it kind of worked its way down into my lungs. I had to get some steroids and antibiotics to fix it up. So I'm still suffering from that. So here we are. In this pane, I have those instants which I recorded up there, and now let's try to align them. And I guess the best way of doing this is pull this little line over right at the start of that muzzle, and then drag the sonic crack instant right on top of it, and we look and see that they don't line up much. So let's get a closer look. Did we do something wrong? No, they just don't line up. And even if we were shifted it to the right a little bit, you still see that they wouldn't line up. Now this is the first part of volley 6. I call it 6A, that contains 13 rounds. And this is a good example because it kind of simulates what the other channel was doing, and it has a very large lag. So when you line up the muzzle blast with a supersonic crack, you generally would get something that looks like this. Oh yeah, here's one that kind of looks like it lines up, but let's see, none of the others do except for the first one. The second one is close, but the others. But if we change the scale down to something small, oh, now they all kind of look like they line up, don't they? Sort of. Yeah, well, once you look real close. And that's typically what's happening, is that people use a fixed scale. But anyway, so why is this? What's the logic behind trying to line these up? And, you know, I'm at a loss to explain other people's thinking. I think it's just a lack of real understanding. Because if we go to look at the math, and for that we're going to have to do some of my infamous drawings here, we can see that if we have a gun and it spits out a bullet, and that supersonic bullet has a sonic cone associated with it. Let's make it narrower because this is a fast bullet. Oh, this is a Mach 3 plus bullet. Okay. Yeah, it's not very good straight lines, but that works. And then we have a recording device out, say, here. The muzzle blasts, of course, come out of the end of the bullet in those waves, and they make their way to the most direct path possible to the recording device, which is a straight line from the muzzle tip to that, and that's the path that the muzzle blast occurs. And that's, you know, how long it takes to do that. We'll call this M for muzzle. So the time of arrival at the observation, time of arrival of the muzzle, is really quite easy. It's the distance m divided by the speed of sound, which is denoted by C0. So if that were 1,100 feet and the speed of sound were 1,100 feet, that would be 1 second. Okay, but what about the supersonic crack? Well, that's a whole different critter. And the supersonic crack follows its own little gimmick. And the gimmick is that the sound that arrives, the supersonic sound that arrives at this recording location reached there by the shortest possible path, which is perpendicular to the leading edge of the sonic cone. So here's the sonic cone, and so if we draw a line from this that's both intercepts that point and is perpendicular to the leading edge of the sonic cone, then this point would be where the supersonic crack originated from. So now to determine the arrival time of the supersonic crack, and we'll call that T sub S for shock wave. And in both these cases, you have to add in the time at which the bullet was fired. So both of them are going to be plus T sub n, which is the nth bullet. Basically, the bullet has to travel this distance from the muzzle to that point, which we'll call A, and that happens at the speed of the bullet, so we have to account for that. So that would be A divided by the speed of the bullet, which is V sub B, and then it has to go from that point to the recording device, which is B, and that occurs at the speed of sound. So we have to add in then B over the speed of sound. So we can see right away that the shock wave takes a different path. Now we know that the shock wave always arrives at the recorder first, and while this path may look longer, it is not, if I've drawn everything correctly, that is, because this distance, if the bullet's traveling at Mach 3, occurs at a very short time, and this distance B, which is obviously shorter than M, even when added to A, is shorter than the total time of M over the speed of sound. Okay, so now we understand how the shock wave timing occurs. So if we take lag, let's see what we're on blue here. Lag is equal to time of the shock wave minus the time of the muzzle. And we could get from that, if we canceled out, subtracted everything, these would cancel out to be 0 because they're both, the shot is fired at the same time. And then we would have M and B so it would be S would be B minus M over C naught, and then we would have, because we were just combining the terms with like denominators, B minus M, B minus M. That would be negative. Oh well. And then we would have, and actually it should be the other way around, because we want to get a positive number, so it should have been shock wave first. I mean second. The muzzle arrives last, so it's a larger number, so it should have been like this. In which case, those two things are going to be just the opposite. So it's M, which is M. I wanted to keep all the numbers positive, is what I was doing. Okay. And then we're going to get minus B over C naught. Okay, so that's the value for calculating lag. Now, when we go back over here to the Sonic Visualizer session, and we align these two, then effectively we are canceling out the lag and the delay, the propagation delay associated with the muzzle blast. So we are effectively setting all these terms equal, and then that will give us basically a value for T sub n. And that's just one bullet. Okay, what happens though on the next bullet? Because that's where the real critical comes in. And if you wanted to, you could set Tm equal to Ts and solve this, and say that, well, if you align both of these, you're basically saying that the time of arrival of the muzzle and the time of the shock is the same, which would mean Ts equals Tm, and then you could substitute in the values and eliminate the common things. So T sub n would go out right away, and you'd have to end up with m over the speed of sound equal to a over to the terms of that. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but when does that occur? Because that's what people are asserting. Well, geometrically, that's just not possible, because you have a whole bunch of different things going in there. But if you were to solve that equation for any one of these variables, you'd quickly find out that it becomes a nonsensical solution. Okay, but more importantly, let's forget all the equations for the moment. I'll erase all these things, since we're just doing all this graphically. And I wasn't quite clear on that example over there anyway, because it would be well, anyway. So here's one bullet. Now comes along the second bullet, right? Because we've asserted that by lining up the first sonic crack with the first muzzle, that all the rest should line up. And fundamentally, that's only going to be true if the lag stays the same. And I've already asserted that's only true if everybody traveled the same path each time. Well, we know that's a ridiculous assertion, just to begin with, because they don't. And for example, if we had a bullet, the second bullet, oops, I'm on erase. Now I've got to draw it back in. If, for example, the second bullet were to go this direction, then we'd have to do the calculations for M and B and A. Well, not for M. M stays the same, because the shooter and the listener don't change, and therefore the muzzle blast always arrives equally for all shots. But the time from the shot to the time of the receiving distance of the muzzle blast, in other words, the time to propagate from the muzzle blast to the receiving location, is constant, provided the static positions. But when the path changes of the bullet, then we now have to go do that same calculation with the cone. And so if we try to maintain the same cone, I want yellow, same cone shape so we don't fudge anything. That's a little wide. Let's make it a little narrower. And let's select a little bit more interesting path. Okay, there we go. That's much more interesting. So then we draw in the conic, and if I've done it correctly, let's say that's about right. Okay, great. So now we have to find the line perpendicular to that second cone that intercepts this. And if my eyeballs are good, it would be essentially this. So now that B prime, we'll call it, the value for the distance from where the shock wave gets generated that goes to the recorder, is extremely close to the gun. So A prime essentially becomes 0, and now the propagation time for B prime over the speed of sound is approximately equal to M over the speed of sound, which means that the lag is approximately 0. So this is just one real example, and this happens quite a bit. It doesn't end up being 0, but it ends up being small. So we didn't change anything but the bullet path. The speed of sound, the speed of the bullet, the recording location, and the shooter location all stayed the same, but the second shot went off in a different angle, and because of that different angle, the lag changed from whatever it was to 0. And so now when you align the first one, you can't get the second one aligned because the first one had a different lag. And that's the problem. And I hope I've explained this in a way which makes sense. Now, most deviations in bullet path are not as severe, shall we say, but they do happen. And you can say, well, what do typical things look like? Well, you know, here in the last few videos we've been examining Volley 7, so let's go look at that. So I'm going to quit this program. No, I'm not going to quit it. I'm going to erase some stuff because I might need to I might need to do some more drawings here. All right, so let's go over to what we've been looking at for the last few videos. Here's a lag graph for Volley 7 for the Oasis Apartments. Now, Oasis Apartments is quite a distance away from Mandalay Bay and at a large angle relative to the bullet path, and therefore we're in the second bullet scenario that we've just explained, where the lag is small. And here we see the lag having a range of 10 to 70 milliseconds. But even within that small range, we can see that it varies all over the place, except for a couple situations. This one, where there's 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 4 to 6 bullets there, which have an extremely close lag. These two sets of 2, and that one, and we've got 3 groups there that, if you were to align the first shot in each group with the muzzle and the sonics, the remainder in that group would probably align also. But other than that, none of the others are going to align because they're all over the place. And even if we go up to the southwest corner, or north, was it southwest corner? Southwest corner of Reno and the Boulevard, the mirror image, quote unquote, the mirror image of Oasis Apartments, you can see that here we have less of an agreement, because the range for the lag here was 70 milliseconds to 140. So small errors now become more prominent, and you would have a hard time matching these things up. This group might begin to line up, you know, but generally speaking, if you lined up any one of these muzzles with its corresponding supersonic crack, you're not going to get too many others to line up. So this is a real lag graph for a real volley, and as you can see, the lags aren't constant. And for anyone to assert that by lining up the first muzzle with the first sonic and anything else lines up, the lags are going to have to be relatively constant. And yeah, you know, sometimes just because of the timing, there are things that do line up, but that's happenstance. This is the real deal here. And you can't make these align. No matter what you try, what you do, you cannot make them align. And so the best thing that this process could produce in terms of real information is perhaps an estimate of how widely the shots are in terms of being the same. But even then, you know, you'd have to compare each one individually, and yeah, you know, it's just not a good idea to do it. So anyway, once again, if you see somebody using the technique of aligning muzzles with supersonic cracks, run for the hills. All right, that's it for tonight. We'll grab you in the next one.